welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 152 for April 28th, 2011. I'm Ryan Schraub.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Malventano.
Alrighty, did he cut out there? I'm not sure he cut out for me. We'll see. Alan is here. Yeah, I think you're good. I think you're good.
I'd rather not, but, that's Alan.
Look, we all got to deal with this once a week, all right? Let's just push through it, make something that people will download, and then we'll be done.
They won't.
Let's see. Housekeeping stuff at the beginning. Let's see. We didn't get a whole lot of emails this week, so I'm going to reiterate this at the beginning of the show in case we start rambling on and people just stop later in the episode, which is probably inevitable. Podcast@pcper.com is the email address for your questions, comments, theories, things like that. And if you want to leave us a voicemail, it's 1-888-38-PC-PER, toll-free in the U.S. and Canada. Let's see. First order of business. We have a new website. I know we told you this last week, but if you haven't gone to pcper.com and checked it out, you definitely need to. We've now got everybody kind of trained up and using it. We've got content flowing out, news going up, reviews going out, lots and lots of contests. They are still ongoing. As of this recording, we are giving away another OCZ 120 gig Vertex 2 SSD, and all you have to do to sign up for it is put a comment on that news post. It doesn't get much more difficult than that. We've given away Corsair HS1 headphones. We've given away an Asus Maximus 4 Extreme motherboard, which is like a $370 motherboard. We have other stuff still coming up. We have MSI prizes. We have an Asus graphics card we're giving away. We have some Corsair SP2500. Is that right, Josh? Speakers?
Yes.
We got a lot of stuff left. Usually one a day, maybe every other day, just depending on how frequently I get to update those posts. So make sure you check that out. Also, this is a call here. If you are interested in, now that we have the new system up, this is kind of what we were waiting for this push of new writers, new editors, that type of thing. We need to replace all the other people on this podcast, including myself, get some fresh faces in here. Probably not, but if you are interested in writing for PC Perspective, if you have interest in hardware from graphics cards to motherboards to laptops to cell phones to tablets, anything like that, if you know about that technology, you want to write about that technology, we're looking for people to fill up space at PC Perspective. So send me an email, RSHROUT, rshrout, first initial, last name, @pcper.com. Let me know that you're interested, if you have any kind of writing examples, topics that you're interested in, things like that, and we will go from there. The more the merrier at the site. So,
hey, I'd just like to put my name in there. I'm interested. I think I could probably write.
Is that what you call that? Is that? Okay.
Well,
yeah, sure.
It's vomiting on the keyboard, a.k.a. writing.
And then wiping it off, and then letters come out. That's actually
exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like a face roll, but one that you don't want to actually put your face in.
Let's see. Let's move on to some content. We actually did have some reviews published this week. Most of them were not by people on this podcast. Actually, we had 2 notebook reviews go up from Matt Smith, who was doing a fantastic job of figuring out the whole new editing system and getting really good content up. The first one is a review of the Sony Vaio Y series. This is actually a what's the screen size here? 11.6 inch. We could call it a netbook, small notebook, whatever you want to call it. It's based on the AMD Fusion E350 1.6 gigahertz dual core processor, 3 gigs of DDR3 memory, had a 500 gig 5400 RPM drive. Like I said, an 11.6 inch screen, 1366 by 768 resolution, home premium 32-bit, blah, blah, blah. Same type of stuff there. Webcam, USB 2.0, HDMI and VGA. That's all good news. 3,500 milliamp hour battery, or 3,500 milliamp hour, right? Am I saying that correct? It's actually a really nice looking system as well, too. If you take a look at the photos, it has a lot of the classic stylings of the Vaio series in the last few years, the kind of cylindrical shape on the hinge. It's actually pretty nice. It's just an overall nice looking machine for this kind of low cost form factor. Matt seemed to actually really like the user interface. The keyboard was pretty good. The screen did pretty well. Looking here at the battery life, and it did fairly well. So the Battery Eater Reader's Bench, which is kind of the one we use the most. There's one that really stresses the system to get a maximum battery life, but that one's not as realistic. Most of the time, people who are using their notebook on the go and are away from an outlet are reading on the internet, doing basic browsing, basic word processing, that type of thing. We got 5 hours and 12 minutes on that, which is pretty good, and continuous use with Wi-Fi on about 4.5 hours. So it's actually pretty good for a small-size machine like this. Not the best we've seen, but far, far from the worst that we have come across. Performance is pretty good, better than the Atom processor. The graphics definitely better than anything that we've seen in the Atom processor, including those that use the Ion chipset, I guess, from Nvidia. So that's all good. Yeah, so that Sony Vaio Y, and then we also had another netbook style, I guess, the Asus EPC 1215N. This one actually does use the Atom plus Ion combination. It's a little bit newer iteration of it, a 12-inch screen, same resolution, slightly larger battery, 2 gigs of memory instead of 3 gigs of memory, 250 gig drive instead of a 500 gig drive, but a lot of still interesting features in that regard. I'm trying to see here what the battery life is on that. We kind of know what to expect in terms of performance with Ion and Atom. Not a whole lot in terms of performance. Good enough in some cases, depending on what kind of high-definition video you're using online. It probably will be okay. Now, the battery life is actually better here, 5 hours and 48 minutes on the Reader Bench, and almost 5 hours with Wi-Fi on. So these are two notebooks that you should definitely check out if you're looking for something, under $500, good performance, not outstanding performance, but decent performance, especially for the price and the battery life levels that you're getting out of this. So check out those two reviews. Matt's done a really good job. We have a couple of other reviews planned for next week as well, including our first dual-core Sandy Bridge notebook review, which I think a lot of people have been asking for. So that will be good.
On to the next subject. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the Fusion stuff that we're going to see coming up here shortly. Of course, everybody knows that Llano is going to be out sometime this summer, but something that's been kind of overlooked is what AMD is going to be doing with their current Ontario and Zacate type chips. We've seen them now for about 5 months. They've been in production probably for about 8 months now. And during that time, the AMD designers are still getting a feel for TSMC's 40-nanometer process. And according to some of the rumors that we've been hearing, there's going to be a new stepping, and it's going to include a turbo mode that we have not seen before on these products. The C60 is going to be the first product that will see this turbo mode. It's usually the C50 is clocked at 1 gigahertz. It's still a dual core part. I believe the graphics portion is clocked at 250 megahertz. All these things are off the top of my head, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot else there. Anyway, the C60 is going to still be stock clocked at 1 gigahertz for the core and 250 megahertz for the graphics, but it's going to enter a turbo mode now and then. And it's going to go to 1.33 gigahertz for the cores, and it's going to jump up to 400 megahertz for the graphics portion. So AMD has been, working obviously with TSMC to optimize the process, to work through any kind of issues that they have, see if they can, stop as much leakage as possible for these parts. And the best thing about apparently this upcoming C60. And again, I'm not under NDA yet. I haven't heard anything yet. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I'm guessing so far that you have not. Crossing fingers. But anyway, it's still going to be in the same TDP range as the lower clocked parts. So this is going to be something that we'll probably see a little bit more of throughout probably the rest of this year, because as we well know, even though they're really hoping and praying that 28 nanometer will be on the horizon and will be available for Q3 and Q4 production, I'm just still not sure about that. I haven't heard anything. Nobody's talking about it. The graphics people are being really, really hush-hush, and this is something that we really haven't seen in the past. I mean, usually as we have a new process node opening up, There's a lot of talk about it. The people are excited, and you tend to hear a lot of stuff about it, and we just haven't. And so I think that this is, 28 nanometers is a big hurdle, and obviously Global Foundries is well behind, I believe, TSMC. And but in the meantime, everybody who's relying on 40 nanometer process is really kind of scratching their heads and hoping for the best. And at least at AMD on their APU side, I think that they're really trying to work out any of the potential bugs and issues with this process to get faster clocked products out that still fit into those pretty constrained TDPs. So we will see more from AMD, at least on the APU side, and we probably should be hearing about a lot of these parts in the next 3 months. And I'm talking primarily Ontario and Zuccotti, because in the next 2 months we're going to hear a lot more about Bulldozer and Llano, and so keep your ear to the ground and stay tuned.
Cool. We had another review that was published by Steve Griever, our resident motherboard guy, also does a lot of other cases and random things as well. Very good at this type of stuff. Did a review of a motherboard that I think surprised him. I think it surprised me reading over his article, that was actually as impressive as it was, and that is the ASRock Fatality P67 Professional LGA 1155 motherboard. So this is a Sandy Bridge motherboard. It's P67. Obviously, all the new ones are B3 revision based. Now, I know a lot of people probably in the podcast.
And that guy still gets paid money to use his name.
He is absolutely getting paid money.
So hate that guy. I mean, he's a nice guy.
He is a really
He
nice
does
guy.
well with what he does. Boy, why couldn't I?
A little jealous. You would like to have a Josh Walrath branded ASRock motherboard, I bet.
Well, I mean, Josh Walrath is kind of hard to pronounce as compared to Fatality, but
yeah, but you just put a number in there and you're good.
Just call me
Jonathan
60 or
Wendell,
something.
Josh Walrath.
Yeah, I'm thinking J0SH.
I'm DJ JDW.
Anyway, the motherboard itself is actually pretty cool. It has a lot of interesting features. It's got a good-looking design to it. Obviously, kind of a black and red color scheme to it. Heatsink has the Fatality logo on it. The aesthetics are there. It has some interesting features on it. It does have support for 6 USB 3.0 ports on it, which I think is the most I've seen on any motherboard, actually. There are 4 USB ports in the back panel, and then there's a front panel, 3.5-inch drive bay adapter that has 2 more USB 3.0 ports. So that's pretty nice. There's actually a PS2. Is it a PS2 port that has? It is a PS2 port that has a specific polling frequency of 50 megahertz that he prefers over whatever the standard is for the gaming mice that he uses, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what that means to you or I that's playing Portal 2 and not in any type of professional or training mode, but it's interesting that they would, this isn't just trivial stuff. Sometimes they're implementing pretty specific features. There's Fatality branding on the power and reset buttons, which is nice. It does have 10 SATA ports internally, 2 eSATA ports. That's nice. It has gold-colored capacitors. I don't know if they're actually gold, but they are definitely gold-colored. Support for 3-way crossfire and SLI configurations. I mean, it does have a pretty good list of features. It also has a well-designed UEFI BIOS. If you look at the screenshots on the third page of that review, you actually see that the UEFI BIOS actually has his picture in the background, which I think even for me, who's a friend of the guy, would be a little unnerving looking at him the whole time I'm trying to tweak and overclock settings and stuff like that. That might be a little bit too much. But the settings are there. The user interface is pretty good. Steve really liked that. So, go through the review, check out some of the benchmarks. It overclocked pretty well. It's a high-quality board. A lot of people don't necessarily consider ASRock to be a high-quality option. But, the Fatality brand used to be on ABIT, right? Yeah, it was an ABIT brand, and that actually kind of made sense, right? ABIT was a huge overclocking brand, overclockers and gamers, Fatality attached to that. And so now they found their way here with the ASRock brand. It's actually a pretty solid board. Pricing on it is actually kind of reasonable for a high-end board like this, $239 on Newegg. So, we like I said, we just talked about a Maximus 4 Extreme motherboard that was selling for like $370 on Newegg that we gave away on the website. So this one you can pick up for less than $250 and seems to have similar features. It did get a gold award from us and Steve. So that.
And remember, Fatality's watching you, Ryan. He's watching you.
Only while I'm overclocking, though, which is good news. I don't want him watching me all the time. That could be weird. Actually, let's see. We're going to talk about the EVGA GeForce GTX 460 2-win card here in just a second. But I think before we do that, we should thank today's podcast sponsor. All right. Thank you, MSI, for sponsoring our show again this week. I'm thinking they must not listen to this show.
Richie? Yeah, no, he's too busy spinning discs.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a DJ. He's a DJ.
You have to repeat it because that's what a DJ would do.
Yeah.
So the next review just went up earlier today is my review of the EVGA GeForce GTX 460 2-win. Now, I had an interesting comment in our review thread there that they thought the pronunciation of it was actually not 2-win, but twin, as in twin, 2 GPUs on one board. And that actually makes more sense than just 2-win. I don't know. Let's take a vote here, a poll. Is it 2-win or twin, Josh?
Twin. I'm all for twins. Oh,
Jeremy?
Yeah. Twins.
Send it to me for a couple of weeks and I'll be able to say.
Fair enough. Alan, are you lead enough to know what 2-win stands for correctly?
Schwarzenegger and DeVito.
Yeah. All right. So the graphics card, I think we've talked about it several times on the show already. I won't go into too much detail. It's 2 GTX 460 GPUs on a single PCB. There are 1 gig frame buffer per card, so 2 gigs total. It does require it requires 2 8-pin PCI Express connectors, so it's a fairly considerably power-hungry device. It does run at the standard GTX 460 clock speeds of 700 megahertz for the core clock and 900 megahertz on the GDDR5 memory clock. Now, it's also a fairly long card. I don't really have anything here to compare it to, but you can see the PCI Express bus along the bottom there. It actually is longer than the GTX 590 that just came out, but it's shorter than the Radeon HD 6990. So it kind of gives you some idea. You can see that there are 3 fans, 2 heat sinks under there. Pretty nice. Now, one of the cooler things about this card is that there are 3 dual-link DVI outputs, and not really focusing on it, and a 4th mini HDMI connection. You can use all 4 at the same time. It does support 4 display outputs. It does support NVIDIA Surround and 3D Vision Surround with the single graphics card, so that's good. It's not the first card to do that. The GTX 590 could do it, but it's one of the very few cards from NVIDIA that can do that. One thing you'll notice is there's an SLI connector up here, and I didn't find out until after I published the review. EVGA told me that it doesn't work. That's not enabled because the GTX 460, if you remember, if you look at the individual cards, there's only one Crossfire connector. So SLI connector, which means you'd only be able to do 2-card SLI if you actually had individual cards. And since this,
I'm surprised that card did not burst into flames when you said Crossfire connector.
Yeah, well, somebody from NVIDIA is on their way to smack me, so it'll happen. But you can't do SLI with this. You can't do quad SLI. You can't do 3-way SLI. It's something EVGA said they're looking into, but I don't think NVIDIA is going to change it, especially considering this is like a previous generation GPU. Performance is pretty much what you would expect. It's GTX 460 SLI in a card, and that's what it performs like. That's what the power consumption is like. There's really not a whole lot technically different between this card and actually having a pair of GTX 460s. The difference is you get this all on one card. You can install this on any system. It doesn't have to be an SLI-ready motherboard. So if you have an AMD 890 board or 880 board, and you want to be able to get a higher performance card like this, you have the option to do this. You don't have to have SLI configuration to do that. Say you had an AMD 890 board and you wanted to do NVIDIA Surround rather than Affinity for whatever reason, your only other option was the GTX 590, which is obviously a $700 plus card if you can find it. The cool thing about this is it's on Newegg for $409, $410, which is about $70 less than the GTX 580. And what's interesting about that is that it performs near the level of the GTX 580 from Nvidia. So it positioned as a single graphics card because nobody else sells this but EVGA. And the graphics cards go, let's see, the 570 is like $339, $349. This is $410, and then $475 to $480 for the GTX 580. So it actually fits into a very good spot in terms of performance. It's definitely faster than the 570, and it's almost as fast as the 580. And I say that because it actually beats it in some cases and loses to it in some cases. So it's a really interesting card, and the only kind of people were kind of commenting in the forum thread there and the review thread there that, why not just you could buy a pair of GTX 460s for, $70, $60 less than one of these cards. And that's true, but you get some of the benefits here of using up less space, potentially less power because you have one fewer PCB to go with there as well. And also you have, the capability to use this on other systems besides SLI certified systems. So it actually did get an editor's choice from us. Really, really came away impressed with it. It's one of those things that's like they could do this with any card. Somebody could make a dual GTX 560 graphics card. Maybe EVGA will do that next. That will outperform the 580 by a considerable margin, but perform less than the GTX 590. And then again, you can find in that $600, $500 price range where you can actually make a product that will fit there. So I commend EVGA for kind of sticking their neck out and making a product like this, and actually I think it's pretty successful option. So if you're looking for something in that $400 price range, if that's your budget, then consider this among the many other options that are out there. Any other ideas or speculation on this particular card, or we'll move on to our next little story here?
Yeah, it's a neat idea. I'm glad that we're finally seeing some differentiation between the manufacturers. I don't know if EVGA had a special deal with Nvidia like they kind of did for the GTX 590 and the North American market, but still, it's neat that someone's stepping out, doing something a little different, and that adds some flavor to what is sometimes a little lackluster market.
Cool. Now, you have a note in here about a just-delivered headphones. I assume we're talking about some review headphones?
Yes, Thermaltake, they're getting into the headphone business. They have a previous generation that's already out. Unfortunately, the previous generation has not had very kind reviews. They were not very robust. The sound wasn't great. So this is kind of their next generation, and they're hoping to really change that. Now, these are kind of the gamer headphones. They're sealed. They've got a USB connector and a little controller in there. It can support the DTS surround sensation headphone, and they're interesting looking products. They look fairly comfy in the box. I've actually listened already to their brothers, the Shock Spin. And those are open-ear headphones, and they actually sound really, really good. I'll be having a more detailed review on that here shortly. But the one funny thing that I found about this one is that in the marketing on it, they're bragging about the gold-plated USB connector to ensure the optimal sound quality.
That is awesome.
Those bits and bytes are going to sound so
it's like
much
a monster
better
thing, right?
with a gold-plated USB cable. So let's knock off a little bit from Thermaltake with going the monster cable route.
Hey, you know what?
Somebody in Taiwan was just not thinking.
I mean, you can market, I guess, however you want. It all depends on if your product actually differentiates itself from everybody else in the market. So,
yeah.
We'll see soon enough. Alan, you just posted something really immediately before the podcast started. It's thinking about next generation SSD controllers pushing something called TLC Flash. Now, I'm not familiar with TLC except for the tender loving care that we all need and deserve.
Yeah, so this is something where just the convenience of a different acronym is winning, because what was supposed to happen was...
Like Charlie Sheen winning?
I suppose. There was only supposed to be SLC and MLC Flash. So
right.
SLC, a single level cell, so you're a single layer. Sorry. I'm just out of it tonight.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to just bust right in here. I mean, how are they going to do TLC Flash without left eye?
I don't know. I have no idea. So here's what happens. You have SLC, which can only hold 1 bit per cell. You have MLC Flash, which was supposed to be multi, which was supposed to be able to handle some multiple of 2, right? So, be it 2, or well, actually, if you count the number of bits per cell, it's not a multiple of 2, but the number of, data stored per cell ends up being a multiple of 2. So basically, you jump from, you can have 2 bits per cell, which was the standard, which everyone has, and any of their drives they're using right now, that have MLC. But that term was supposed to also encompass any, extension of that. So if you did 3 bits per cell, 4 bits per cell, whatever they managed to pull out of that tech in the future, they decided not to do that. They decided to change the M to a T and make it triple. So what you end up having is 3 bits per cell. So what this actually equates to is you have a cell, it can store some voltage between 0 and 1. Or, well, it's actually a different voltage, but if you think of it in bit terms, right, if it's SLC, it'd be either a 0 or a 1, right? So whatever the voltage actually is, it just equates to those 2 levels when you actually read it back, be it binary 0, binary 1. MLC actually has not just 2 states, the low and the high, it actually it adds a couple more in the middle. So what you end up is the equivalent of having 2 bits stored in just one thing that can hold a voltage, basically.
Right.
Triple, or TLC in this case, it actually adds not just 2 in the middle there, it adds 6 more in the middle there. So you end up with 8 different states, which is the equivalent of 2 to the third, 3 bits. So this is pretty tricky to pull off, because if you think about it, flash memory as it degrades, or as it holds a given charge over time, you store some data on it, you just let it sit on the shelf for a year, the voltages are going to drift. You just have a voltage that's floating. It's basically just a really well insulated, an insulated piece of silicon that just sits there and holds a certain number of electrons is basically what's going on there. Right. And whatever it's holding is just a charge state. It's almost like a capacitor or a battery, however you want to equate it to, as far as an equivalent. So Intel and Micron, their process, they're claiming that on their 25 nanometer flash, which they're making now and it's in production in MLC capacity for consumer use, they're saying that they're able to pull off triple with this. Then granted, not like, I don't think they're shipping, or I think they still have to sort of ramp that up, but they can pull off a triple level cell sort of thing with the 25 nanometer process. So that's actually pretty good, because we haven't seen any kind of TLC flash memory come out for 34 nanometer, 50 nanometer. Nobody's really, nothing in production. Nothing we've seen come out in an SSD, right?
Right.
So this is interesting, because if you combine it with the previous announcement, which was, what was it, a couple podcasts ago we talked about it, where they made their drop down to 20 nanometer, right?
Right.
And the whole reason for the drop to 20 nanometer was not necessarily more capacity, but the fact that they could do a shrink of the area that the die takes up, and it's still going to fit in the same size package, but they can get more per wafer, right? If you roll both of these together, and you fast forward, say, 6-8 months from now, if they can get their 20 nanometer process refined enough and shift that to TLC, then you just ended up with 2 ways to shrink that die at the same time, which probably means that then they can up the capacity per die. Instead of 8 gigabytes, they could probably actually make that move to 16 and still fit it in the same package, if you think about it, right? So just on the numbers alone, the die shrink, right, your standard 25 nanometer die, that is, it's funny we're calling that a standard now, but that's what's in, in the current Intel shipping products, that sort of stuff. In the current, or the newer SandForce models, they're shipping 25 nanometer. That die is 167 millimeters squared. The 20 nanometer process dropped it from 167 down to 118. Now, if you go back to that 167 again, if you make it TLC, still on 25 nanometer, it goes from 167 down to 131. So it's not as big of a drop as the process shrink, but it is a drop.
Right.
So basically, if you combine both of those together, there's a potential to really get some high density, relative to what was before. Now, granted, nobody said anything about combining both at the same time, but you can connect the dots. It's just the next logical step for what's going to happen.
Okay. Josh, we have good news about AMD here going on. A very busy start to the year. First quarter results you're saying are generally positive, so showed some good growth. Although I guess we thought, based on the different accounting practices and their stake in global foundries and that kind of stuff, that how well AMD was doing might have been a little bit misleading.
Just a wee bit.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you want to start off the very first with they're having a busy first part of the year, or do you just want me to go into the results?
Well, we can start off with the good news first, which is that we are looking at about 3 million Llano processors coming out very, very soon. It's not so much that they're on target, they're on target and have a lot of stock coming. So it's really nice that we're going to see a lot of APUs coming out.
Yep.
June or July is when they're set. So third quarter, you're actually going to start seeing them hitting the channel. And it's not going to be like, say, a GTX 590 where, if you actually see one in the wild, you should take pictures and sell them because it's rare. There's going to be a lot of them out there. You're not going to be running into things where, okay, we might see it, in the smaller form factors, but we're not going to see it in the large. You won't see it in the retail, but you will be able to buy it prepackaged, already built into a system. Now, we're actually looking at some really good, better than expected APU delivery, which is a whole lot of
Does anybody else worry that because they have this many of them, if sales are somewhat slow, that we're going to see prices really, really, really low, like too low for AMD to even think about making a profit on them? Or do you think they're anticipating sales that good?
Well, in a way, it kind of depends on the performance, doesn't it? I mean...
Yep. Well, they know that already. We don't know that, but they know that.
Yeah.
So you have to figure that they're making that judgment call one way or the other. But
yeah, well, from what I'm hearing from the motherboard manufacturers, demand for these products are very good from OEMs. They're very excited about it, and they're shipping a lot of motherboards out to these OEMs, and they're expecting some pretty decent numbers out of it. So I don't think that they're going to come out initially at a very high price anyway, and we will see a little bit of a drop in price, but I think they're going to hit their targets pretty well, and I don't think it's going to be a situation where they just have so much stockpiled and they're not moving. A lot of the OEMs and ODMs are very excited about this just because it has really superior graphics performance as compared to everything else out there with an integrated CPU.
Okay. Did you want to talk about their financial results then real quick? Or
No, I don't. Okay, fine, I will. I'll talk about it just a little bit.
Right.
Okay, they announced the results. What?
You get to say billion.
Billion. Do I get to put my finger up?
But no, there's no S on the end.
$5.7 billion. Duck lips.
Okay, good enough.
Duck lips. Anyway, so AMD reported last week, and it was pretty good. Usually Q1 of the year is not a good time, especially for AMD. They typically post either some pretty low numbers or a big loss. That's just the way they roll. I mean, they like to buck the market that way. They like to treat their shareholders well, if you know what I mean. But anyway, this Q1 was slightly different. They came out ahead. It was like $1.61 billion in total revenue. And this is where things kind of get a little tricky. Because they have a stake in Global Foundry and because of the way Global Foundry is getting some funding in that, AMD received a market increase in the value of their investment in Global Foundries. Now, if you just look at the paperwork and see they had a $56 million profit on the year. That means that they made $1.61 billion. They only threw out to their employees, their people who are making stuff for them, $1.6044 billion. So they came out $6 million ahead. How was that for some pretty on the sly addition?
Yeah.
I'm a smart guy. Smart. I'm an egghead, as you can tell. But anyway, but when they start doing generally accepted accounting practices, we suddenly see AMD had a $500+ million net revenue for that quarter. Now, a lot of that, of course, is coming. Well, the vast majority, 95%, is coming from 90%. But anyway, coming from their Global Foundries stake. So it is nice to see that the company is able to actually make some real money that they could actually put in the bank, as compared to taking out of the bank and out of their big old slush fund of like $1.2 billion that they have as a lifeline. But even better is that Global Foundries is accumulating value for them, and their stake is growing. So this was a positive quarter for AMD. Now they're not expecting miracles for Q2. They're thinking it's going to be a little bit down and a little bit flat. And when you consider that they're ramping up production of Bulldozer and Llano, they could very well have a negative quarter coming up, just because they've had to outlay this money to actually get the chips into the channel, and they're not receiving any revenue from those chips as of yet. But this is actually setting up for a really good third quarter, especially if they can get out decent numbers of the Bulldozer, and from what everything is saying, that the 3 million Llano processors, they should be able to do pretty well next quarter. But again, this current quarter is a big ramp up. The APUs that they have out already are doing very, very, very well for them. I mean, they by I think January they had already shipped 3 million of the Zacate and Ontario-based processors, and we didn't even see stuff in the channel, in the retail channel, until the end of January, and even then in very, very limited numbers. And still, it's not incredibly common. It's just the OEMs have been just eating these things up. AMD's been loving it, and they're doing well with being slightly ahead of the curve in terms of graphics. Now people are saying how much CPU is enough, and I think that we've kind of hit that point for the majority of applications. But when we have Windows 7 and upcoming Windows 8 and casual games going into heavier duty 3D, the graphics portions are becoming much more important to a lot of users' experience. And again, I think AMD is significantly ahead of Intel, and this is something they're going to try to push as hard as they can to gain as much market share. And but I would say within a year and a half, Intel's going to be doing some interesting things in graphics as well. So make hay while the sun is shining,
or something like that.
Yeah.
Jeremy, tell us a little bit about OCZ Technologies' latest kind of SSD modification or something like that. Is this a new firmware, or is this a whole new drive?
The Max IOPS.
Sounds cool.
Yes, OCZ is putting out for their Vertex 3 line, that really expensive one that most of us have yet to play with, the new Max IOPS drives, which are, they're following the same thing, Vertex 3, so they're SATA 6 gigabits, but they've got SandForce 2200 processor and premium flash NAND. Not just the regular, but the premium stuff.
Interesting.
And, really, it's not a huge change from what they've been putting out. They're sort of pushing the fact that they're trying to hit about 75,000 IOPS in their benchmarks, and they're jumping into 120, 240, and 480 gigabit sizes with, of course, trim support. It's, as far as I really understand it, not a huge change from what we're seeing with the original launch. Alan, on the other hand, likes to talk about his IOPS and might know a little bit more than I do.
Yeah, my understanding on this one is it's supposed to basically sit between the Pro and the consumer grade model. So it's probably going to be the consumer capacity points, obviously, because it's 120, 240, 480 versus 100, 200, 400. So that would be enterprise grade. So they're keeping the lower, lesser over provisioning of the flash, but at the same time they're carrying over some of the other optimizations they use on the Pro series, like the enterprise grade sort of stuff. So I think that's just like sort of an in-between firmware tweak with just a little bit of better hand-picked sort of flash, like, stuff they can get away with slightly lower latencies on, which is what you have to pull off to get higher.
I was going to say, is there any benefit to hand-picking NAND flash like that? I mean...
Well, because there's thresholds to it, right? And flash memory is not all created equal. It's almost like overclocking, right? These guys aren't necessarily overclocking the flash. The clock speeds are probably still the same, but it's just that you request, you issue a request for a certain piece of data from flash memory. It takes a certain amount of time to turn that around. Well, most of the time they'll be really conservative on that. Well, that being conservative equates to time, which every I/O, stacks up. So that's what your IOs per second limit is. So if they can, trim some of those margins, that means they have to use better flash memory compared to what would be in the, the bigger margin drive, right, if you want to think about it that way. So it sort of forces them to do that, and I guess it's a sort of a good way to get flash memory that is going to be a little bit better compared to the standard consumer grade, if you want to call it that. Yeah, so it's like an in-between, basically. Yet another model to be added to the SSD decoder.
One day, right? One day.
Yes. Shakes fist.
There you go. Okay, one more bit of news before we jump into a handful of emails and get to our hardware software picks. This was something I posted up earlier today about Nvidia Synergy. Synergy will offer discrete and integrated GPU support on Sandy Bridge. If this sounds familiar, that's because it is a technology that was kind of announced and showcased by Lucid called Virtue, VIRTU. That was Lucid Virtue that they called it GPU virtualization, hence the name. Allows you to run a discrete graphics card at the same time as being able to use the features and technology of the Intel processor graphics embedded on the Sandy Bridge processors. What's cool about that is you could do the QuickSync video technology with at the same time or in conjunction with having a discrete card that would do DX11 gaming and high-performance gaming and stuff like that. Before, or actually I guess currently still, if you have a Sandy Bridge processor and you install a discrete graphics card, you don't get to access any of those Intel integrated features, which is kind of a letdown because that's one of the coolest things about that new processor. Well, Nvidia Synergy is basically the Nvidia proprietary version of Lucid Virtue, and it works in a very similar manner to it, and very similarly to how Nvidia Optimus works on the mobile front. Optimus allows dynamic switching between the GPU and the integrated graphics, the discrete and integrated graphics running on the same system. We really like Optimus on the mobile front. My experiences with it have been pretty positive. The interface that you have, the way they've integrated into the operating system is very nice, smooth, robust. A lot of things that the Lucid software was kind of lacking in polish and finish. The NVIDIA software definitely looks like it's going to have. Some interesting statistics or information from this leak from VR Zone is that they're not going to require any special GPU SKUs, no special power circuits or motherboard work. So what that means is your current and existing NVIDIA graphics card will be able to use this software. And I don't know if your existing motherboard will work, but it's not going to require any extra work in the design cycle on the design side of these motherboard vendors. The platforms that it will support, it will not support the P67 chipset. That's because the P67 chipset doesn't support the video output connections that are required in order to take advantage of the integrated graphics on the processor. If you currently have an H67 or H61 motherboard, you will be able to support a single discrete graphics card in addition to the transcoding and other features of the Intel Sandy Bridge processor graphics. But the real key here is with the Z68 chipset that's going to be coming out next month. That's not only going to support running a GPU and a integrated GPU at the same time, but it'll even support SLI configurations as well. So you'll be able to run SLI graphics configurations for gaming and still use the integrated Sandy Bridge processor graphics for transcoding, DVD playback, whatever it is you want to do. The only kind of caveat here is that it will require one display to be connected to the integrated GPU. So very similar to how Lucid's Virtue works today, you have to have your primary output connected to the dual-link DVI or HDMI or DisplayPort connection on the motherboard. So you need to pay attention to what display output options your motherboard, your Z68 motherboard, is potentially going to have for that. The software is going to be free to consumers without the need for licenses or any kind of, like hacks like that. But they haven't clarified. They say you don't need a special graphics card, but I'm not sure if they're only going to work on it's only going to work on approved or validated motherboards, which is something NVIDIA likes to do that I think is stupid. But we'll see how they get around that. There's also no word on how NVIDIA Surround or 3D Vision may or may not work. My guess is that those will not work because you have to output through the frame buffer of the integrated GPU rather than the discrete GPU. So Surround and 3D Vision might be pretty complicated. This puts Lucid software in a tough spot because now they've lost half of their market, right? If NVIDIA is giving this stuff away and it works with pretty much all motherboards out there, we have two Z68 motherboards in-house, and they both have the NVIDIA Synergy logo and, ironically, the Lucid Virtue logo on it, which kind of says to me that I don't think AMD has one of these solutions in the bank quite yet. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out. But yeah, it's curious to see what this is going to turn into. And it's always the problem if you're a software company or if you're any company that depends on somebody else's products. It's always likely that somebody like that company will come in and just replace you and make an easier, cheaper piece of software that is less complicated. So keep an eye out for that. Z68 launch is coming relatively soon, I guess. So
for those of you that need to play SLI games and transcode at the same time.
Exactly. And who doesn't need to do that, right? Let's get into emails real quickly here. podcast@pcper.com is the address for that. Let's send our first email over to Alan. It does mention things like RAID and RAID.
Italian Mafia.
And Italian Mafia, yeah. So there you go.
Let's see. Greetings, beloved podcasters. I have a question regarding the best RAID setup for a media server. Do you have a storage guru who could shed some light on the subject? No. Maybe your friend
does
from
he
the Italian
eat cheesecake raw out of the bucket?
I eat cheesecake filling. All right, so my media server hosts MP3s, ripped DVDs, as well as Blu-rays for streaming to a home theater PC over gigabit Ethernet. It is also used for backing up data from various desktops and laptops in our house. This is actually almost the exact same setup as what my PC does. To store all that data, I use 5 1-terabyte drives in a RAID 5 on an Intel ICH-10R controller. I'm not really unhappy with the setup, except that it seems to take a while to write large data files to it. I also had 2 drives supposedly fail according to the Matrix Manager, which forced me to buy new ones and rebuild the RAID, but when I plugged the failed disks into an eSATA port, they seemed to work just fine. In general, would RAID 10 be better for my purpose? I know this question is subject to a lot of discussion on the web, but I value your opinion and ask, what would you do?
What would you do?
What would I do? Well, okay, I'll answer.
You don't want to know what Alan would do.
I'll answer that with what
He's
I
wanted
actually
in
do.
7 systems.
No, okay, so really huge raids, which we refer to from back when Colleen was on the podcast with us as a Death Wish raid.
Right.
Even in a RAID 5, that's still a Death Wish raid. You start putting large numbers of drives, large capacity drives behind a motherboard chipset controller. They're not meant for that. Yes, they can do that, but they're really picky. Actually, just ask Ryan. He knows. If you breathe on one of the drives wrong, it might tell the controller that, or the controller might just say, nope, I don't like what that drive's doing. I'm going to time it out and fail it. And then that'll force a rebuild. And then if another drive happens to do that at the same time during the rebuild, then you just caught your 2 failures. So yeah, even with RAID 5, it's too much to throw onto a motherboard chipset. They're good with SSDs. Don't get me wrong, they're really good. They're actually better when you put SSDs on them, especially on an ICH 10R. They outperform even like the best RAID card with the same SSDs under it. However, something like this, big bulk storage, media center kind of stuff, first get yourself a real RAID card. The kind that actually have the processing engine on it. And then as long as you have backups, I think you're okay with RAID 5. But if you don't have backups, you should get something that supports RAID 6 and try to throw in an extra drive there. Because what you're doing is if you do get that one drive failure, you want to make sure you're covered in case something else happens on a subsequent failure while you're trying to do the rebuild. And RAID 6 is the only way you're covered there. RAID 10, which he mentions, is sort of better, but it's better performance-wise if he's going to stick with the ICH controller, because there's no parity. You're not worried about calculating parity. There's less overhead. It basically just pretends that it's a mirrored stripe. So you have 2 drives striped, another 2 drives striped, then you mirror them. So you have better performance generally all around. The catch is you just donated 2 drives to the RAID.
I don't like donating hard drives.
Yeah,
I got to be honest.
Just donating 1, you donated 2. And since he has 5 1-terabyte drives, RAID 10 is not going to be an even subdivision there. So he's going to have to buy an extra drive. So let's see which way he can go on. So if I was him, I would get a on the cheap side dedicated RAID card, shift to that, and probably stay with the RAID 5 as long as he's careful or has a backup.
You got everything then? That's all the questions in that big long email.
And who are you choking in the background, Alan? I want to know.
Yes.
Background, you say?
Leave the
foreground.
Leave the murder until after the show is done recording. Let's see. Jeremy, why don't you take our second email here that was sent in to us by Josh?
Not by me.
Oh, yeah, we totally believe that.
We'll see.
Yeah.
It's an email from Josh. Love the show. I wish I could marry you all. I'm just so insanely attracted to you, unlike some of the people who watch this live that say we're funny looking. Anyways, I've got an AMD Phenom 2 X4 30.2 gigahertz with an Asus motherboard and an 850-watt PSU. I want to get a very solid GPU. I've been surviving on the motherboard's integrated graphics for 2 weeks. I'll bet you it seems like months. Looking at the 6950, question is, should I get the 1 gigabyte version or should I go higher because I'm definitely considering multi-monitor gaming? Should I be looking at a different card? I need the card to be below $300 or so, but would increase the budget if I see a significant jump with the 6970. Any advice would help. Love the show, and please don't fire me. Oh, wait, yeah, please don't fire Josh, because this email wasn't from Josh.
It wasn't from him, yeah.
Not from me at all.
Well, at $300, the 2 gigabyte 6950 is easily available. You just shop around a little bit, and the thing that I love about mine and that many other people love about it is that the 6950, more often than not, is a 6970 with a different BIOS. Very easily flashable. If you're really looking to save money, though, the difference between the 1 gig and the 2 gig card, even with multi-monitor gaming, and I'm assuming since you're looking at a single card, we're not talking multiple 30-inch monitors, but smaller, 20s, 22 inches, maybe 24-inch monitors. That resolution, you guys tend to only see Metro 2033 really get hit if you don't have that 2 gig of RAM. For most of their testing, multimedia, Cinebench, and that, I'm not really seeing a huge difference. So I don't know that a multi-monitor is going to have a huge impact from getting that second gig of RAM. It is going to have an impact, and, as pretty much the poster boy of DX11 games, which is Metro 2033, because Crysis 2 can be played on just about anything, you're going to see games that do start to take really like to have the ability to have a frame buffer that's just bloody huge. So look around. You will be able to find a 6950, which is a 2 gig for $300. Keep an eye out a little bit longer, although 2 weeks with integrated graphics is probably long enough. You might find a good deal on a 6970.
Cool. And we've got one more email. How about Josh? Since you like to send in emails, you can read this one as well.
Exactly. Please don't fire me. Oh, wait. Email from Arcanic, not to be confused with mechanic or Titanic.
That's
Suddenly, just before April 1st, April Fool's Day, I heard a bit about the AMD 990FX chipset supporting Crossfire and SLI. Woohoo. But sadly, I've not heard one word, not one word, on this since. Could the crew crush my dreams and aspirations and find if this was a well-done early prank post, or must I wait until June? This is a key feature that will make me ignore all reports of AM3 Plus support from MSI, Asus, Gigabyte on some 8XX chipset boards. If I recall, MSI was showing off a 990FX board at CES, which leads me to believe 990FX will be out in June, as well as Bulldozer. Well, sir.
Oh, crush them.
Titanic.
Crush them.
Yeah, SLI is going to be supported. I heard from a motherboard guy, is like, oh, by the way, that whole SLI rumor, it's true. 990FX is going to support Crossfire and SLI natively. Natively! As in a native country. Someone who is from it. Natively.
Okay. That's it? I mean, that's the whole answer?
That's it. That's it. Yeah, it's going to support it. I'm not under NDA.
Well, I can neither confirm nor deny. So, okay, that's it. Emails, podcast@pcper.com, 1-888-38-PCPer, toll-free U.S. and Canada. Thank you for sending in your emails. Please send in more. We love to have them. Hardware software picks of the week. Mine are pretty simple. There was earlier Josh mentioned if we had reached a point where CPU processing was pretty good. Last week I mentioned that we had 24 gigs of Corsair memory we're installing in a video editing machine. We were able to run two quad-core hyper-threaded processors, Xeon processors, 24 gigs of memory. We were able to increase our or decrease our rendering time for specific video by about half, which is pretty awesome, from about 15 minutes to about 7 minutes for just some test video we had. So I would say 24 gigs of memory is my hardware pick of the week. But also my hardware pick of the week is during this entire podcast, next to my studio condenser mic, there has been a computer on and running and actually doing benchmarks. If we look behind me here, you will see that there's a result from PC Mark Vantage. It has literally just finished. And what has been doing that testing is this machine right here. This is a system we are testing for review from Puget Systems. This is one of their home theater PC designs. Ultra quiet is kind of the goal here. It's another one of those systems where you really can't tell if it's on unless you see some kind of light or fan spinning. You've got a huge scythe. Shuriken is the heatsink here. No graphics card. We're using the Sandy Bridge based processor graphics on this for the home theater processing, that kind of stuff. A power supply here. You can kind of see it in here. This is a Seasonic 90 plus gold, 90 plus rated power supply. You can see right now it's on. The fan's not even spinning. Very, very cool, very efficient. It has an SSD and a standard 1.5 terabyte drive, and it's weird. This black box here is actually something called a Scythe drive something. I can't remember what it is exactly, but there's a 3.5-inch hard drive mounted inside this case that has noise dampening as well as heatsink properties to it. Just a 1.5 terabyte caviar green. I don't know about you, Alan. My first thought was this is probably like dangerous for a hard drive, like a standard spindle-based hard drive. But I imagine they wouldn't do that unless they were pretty sure about it. So,
I don't know, 1.5 terabyte caviar green is only like at this point, it's probably like a 2-platter drive.
Yeah.
So it's really not going to make a lot of heat even in that enclosure. And that thing's like aluminum though, isn't it? That little shell.
I don't know. It's pretty
that's
solid.
Aluminium. Get it right.
Yeah,
We'll have a full review of it.
Thank you, Josh.
If it conducts anything at all, and a lower capacity, it's probably why they went with 1.5 terabytes instead of something like 2.
Yeah.
Honestly, just to do that, just to go for the lower wattage. So
we'll have a review of this system up pretty soon. It's pretty impressive. Lots of noise dampening stuff as well. And this is, like I said, this was running with the case open, 8 inches from the microphone, and I don't think anybody heard any extra background noise and stuff going on while I was doing benchmarking. So that's my hardware pick of the week. Jeremy, what do you got for us?
Well, I'm not picking the titanium graphic card anyways.
Good.
There's been a big deal made lately about do not track and the fact that, Opera kind of supports it for a long time now. Firefox has just brought it in. Google Chrome, for some reason, have you ever read one of the agreements you signed with Google? Hasn't brought do not track in, but they can delete the nasty super cookies that Flash leaves, the local shared objects. And a lot of people are going on about how this is incredible and it's a huge step forward. And I'd just like to point out that Better Privacy is an extension for Firefox that's been around for over a year now, which has been deleting these things. It's a great way to try and finish a little Flash-based game called You Only Live Once, which essentially does that. It uses an LSO, dumps that cookie onto your system, and once you die in that game, you're dead. You can never play it again.
Doesn't sound like my kind of game at all.
Hey, you only live once. It's actually an amusing game, highly recommended. But, LSOs are kind of a nasty way of tracking your habits of watching Flash videos, which are very popular on many types of sites.
Yeah.
And, so Better Privacy means Firefox does the do not track, and it gets rid of what Chrome is claiming is a new security feature that they've added in, which is, nice to have. On the other hand, there's a little thing called Hacker Typer, which is a little website that I've been amusing myself with, which essentially bash on the keyboard randomly, and it looks like you're coding just like you're on a computer. It's heavily overloaded. It hit Boing Boing and a couple other sites today. But you've seen the movie scenes where the guy is just and the code is flowing.
Right.
It puts it right across your screen, and it even comments it better than I comment my own code.
Nice.
There you go.
That's a good pick. Josh, you have something for us?
Since Hitachi's getting rid of their drive manufacturing ability, they're kind of throwing out the big guns. You can get a 2 terabyte drive spinning 7,200 RPM, SATA 6G for $109.
Nice.
I like big hard drives. I cannot lie, though other reviewers can deny. When a system comes in with an itty-bitty SSD and a round spinning disk in your face, you get sprung.
I'm impressed. You took that further than I thought you were going to be able to get it.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it. No problem.
Alan, you are last on our list. What do you got?
Josh, that was just crazy. All right, so I'm going to sort of piggyback on Josh and then Jeremy, both at the same time. So
God, don't piggyback on me to that.
So watch this one. No, important safety tip for Josh's pick there. It is a 7,200 RPM drive. I just, as my own little personal practice, I try not to go with the high heat producing large capacity at the same time drives, because those are the ones that you really don't want to like fail if you didn't have cooling on them. So yeah, make sure you got a fan pointed at that thing if you have like 2 terabytes of your valuable stuff on it. And then back on Jeremy, I don't know if anybody else saw this, but there's since I'm sort of in the security vulnerability kind of field,
yeah, maybe
that whole iPhone tracking GPS cache thing. Any of you guys looked at that?
Yeah, I've heard some discussions about it. Yeah.
Until
Apple tracks the cell towers, but the Windows Phone and Android track pretty much GPS location, don't they?
No, but see, here's the thing, Jeremy. There's a cache file on iPhones that until Apple decides to patch it, will have had everywhere that iPhone, any tower location that iPhone had ever synced up with on the GPS with a date and time stamp saved in a file sitting on the phone. So, and not only from like however long you've been using that iPhone, but say you got a new iPhone later and then you did the restore from backup thing, guess what? The file carried.
Oh.
So it just kept going because that's where the file was stored. So if you had, I'm probably going to like pull mine because since like, I don't know, 2 years now, I'm just curious to see how many different GPS towers my phone is piggybacked off of or whatever. It's probably like a big zigzag thing all over the freaking U.S. with like.
That's true with you. It probably is at this point.
A couple of CES trips and Utah trip, and yeah, it should look interesting.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, the Windows phones and the Android-based phones do the same thing. It's not
actually,
so much.
Some people are asking in the chat, can you delete it and all these other questions? Well, there's supposed to be a patch that Apple's coming out with that's going to like first truncate that file and make it so it's not storing something from like since the beginning of time. Oh, Burke just pulled one up that's got like a drive across somewhere across Europe or China or something. Yeah, and it's like every single
Europe,
tower.
China, New Jersey, whatever.
So one of those.
It's all the same. It's a wet drive.
You could basically take this file and you could pump it into, if you just Google around, you'll find a website or two that it'll translate that file for you and throw it on Google Maps, and it'll just show you, okay, here's all the, connect the dots, here's everywhere you were for a long time.
Alan's been visiting the Mustang Ranch
quarterly. Quarterly. Nice. All right, that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, pcper.com/podcast.
You said wrap up. Sorry, Alan, Mustang Ranch, wrap up.
It's like
wrap it up. We know.
Make sure you check out the new site, pcper.com. Give us some feedback there. If you are interested in writing for the site, send me an email, rschrout@pcper.com. We are looking for people interested in hardware and technology of all sorts and all kinds. So yeah, that's it for the show for this week. We will see you again next time. I'm Ryan Schrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Albantano.
Thanks for listening.